Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another great podcast, Reverse Cast, the only podcast talk about malware and stuff that related. In our episode, we are invited a legendary Pavel in Windows internals, and I don't know how to describe Pavel because he is a legend. He is a great all times in Windows internals. He wrote many books about Windows internals, Windows kernel programmings. Also, he have a courses in Tracing Academy. You can later check it out. Welcome, Pavel. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So yes, I'm Pavel. You pretty much introduced me fairly well. So I'm ready to move on. If anybody, probably people are familiar with some of my work, my books, my courses, and all that. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah. So actually, Mr. Pavel, let's start with the first question. Why Windows internals important to malware analyst and reverse engineer? More clearly, why should malware analysts have information and have a knowledge about how Windows operating system is work?
Well, if you try to analyze how malware works, so in fact, any kind of software for that matter, you have to understand the platform on which it is running. Otherwise, you have nothing to take into consideration when you see something. You have a function being called. If you have no idea what that function means, what it can or cannot do, then your research is not going to go very far. So you have to understand what is actually going on.
Yeah. So actually, another question came into the documentation of MSDM. For example, for beginners also, beginners when they search for for example, create file Windows API that based on kernel 32.dll. So they don't know how to implement it into the code. So what's your advice to the students to, fix this missing stuff over here?
Yeah, I mean, the Windows API is vast. It's like thousands of functions. And it's very difficult to figure out which is which and what is connected to what because naming convention is not very good. And that's because of some of the history related to this API. So it's very, I would say, beginner unfriendly. If you want to just get started, it's really very overwhelming. My best advice is to start small and look at like my books or courses
Yeah.
and start to build something simple to get a sense of what is going on, what kind of functions you want to use, and focus on certain aspects of the Windows API. It's definitely not easy.
Yeah, I think Pavel, most of the know APTs or state sponsor actors simply they have a big understanding and big picture of the Windows internal because actually if not, how they can able to find lol beans to and abuse it to bypass security solutions.
Yeah, obviously. So they have very detailed knowledge because they're using kernel debuggers and they're using disassemblers and they're looking inside what is actually going on the operating system. And of course, anyone can do that. It's not just the attackers.
Yeah.
Defenders can do that, and well, as well, in fact, that they have to do that to get the basic understanding and the deeper understanding to be able to protect systems against such bad actors.
Yeah. So actually, Pavel, regarding to the MSDN and the other API, so based on your background knowledge for malware analyst and reverse engineer, how they implement and integrate Windows internal into their processes, because actually, as we know, the also legitimate softwares uses kernel 32 user DLL and advanced API for interaction with the registry and other stuff. So how security researcher can reduce and decrease this overwhelming that available because threat actor also make their own softwares look like legitimate but actually trojanize it.
Yeah, so definitely the Windows APIs are not there for malicious intent. They have their own very legitimate uses and applications use them all the time. Even if they're not using them directly, sometimes if you write applications in high level languages like C Sharp or Java or even Python, at the end of the day, if you want to open a file, the create file function is going to be called. There's just no way around it. And so it doesn't really matter which layer you're in. So I think the thing is that you have to look at certain aspects of things that are happening, like a chain of events. It's not just one this function or that function, but if they're in combination, then you start to see maybe there's a pattern here, maybe something is malicious. For example, a function like virtualloc.ex. that
Yes.
allows you to allocate memory in a different process. And so this is there are still legitimate uses for that, but very few in fact. In
Yeah.
fact, that function was created for debuggers because debuggers need to be able to have some control over another process with write process memory, things like that. But
Yeah.
other uses are probably suspicious. And so it's not difficult. That's why many protection software have lots of false positives.
Yes,
They're trying
yes,
to say,
yes.
hey, that's a problem, but maybe it's not a problem actually.
Yeah.
It's a
So,
really big
so,
issue.
so one of the most tasks that malware analysts faces is to indicate this file is malicious or not. Because actually, let's just make an example to encoding a simple PHP code into base 64 or highly obfuscation. Let's upload onto virus total or scan with a Windows Defender automatically the signature based doing a false positive. Why? Because it used or abused by the threat actors many times in web shells as an example. So, Mr. Pavel, how threat actors gain their knowledge about Windows internal, how they implemented this technique that, I mean, bypasses EDRs and bypasses this security solutions.
At the end of the day, the attackers are just like the defenders. They're the same. They have access to the books, they have access to the Microsoft official documentation, they have the debuggers, the tools. They're doing exactly the same thing as defenders. They perform static analysis, looking at the actual code. They perform dynamic analysis by debugging and seeing how things actually behave in practice. And they look for loopholes, look for various vulnerabilities until they find something that they can exploit.
Yeah,
They're just doing the same thing.
I think as a Uriel have a one workshop in a YouTube that mentioned malware development life cycle. So it will test against the security researcher protected and reverse engineering it to like a
Exactly,
defender.
exactly. They're taking the actual security products and reverse engineer those, find their weaknesses because no security product is perfect,
Yeah, of course,
and
of course. So
and of course the attackers just need to succeed once. Don't need to succeed
yeah,
many
and
times.
nowadays
Just
we
one.
we are in age of AI, evil AI, or they bypasses the security prompt and generate a malwares in a second. So Pavel, actually, my question about the drivers. So actually, so I have faced one case during the memory forensic that I found suspicious drivers, and one of the questions that pop up in my mind is which process actually responsible for loading these drivers, because it makes a sense. I know, so actually there are service.exe and from the registry, from control set and so on. But actually, how the security researcher and malware analyst in forensic basis looking for which processes that actually responsible for loading these drivers into the operating systems. Be-
Well, unfortunately, there's no way. I mean, once the driver is in the system, that's it. There's no way to know which process loaded it. It's
Yeah,
too late.
because I have investigated registry, I have investigated base address, offset. There are just no indication that which processes loaded that.
Exactly, because the driver is a generic thing. It's a system-wide thing. At the end of the day, if someone calls a function to load the driver,
Yeah.
then the system takes over and loads that driver, and that's it. When you lose the connection to the original process, there's no way to tell for sure.
And actually, for network connection, once time I use it OSR driver loaders to check the any communication data, but actually there are no communication network, no
No,
network.
it's completely local. It's just calling a function like start service, and that just loads a driver.
Yeah,
That's it. It's
that's
exactly
actually
like local load the service, by the way. It's the same
yeah,
API.
yeah, that's one of the nowadays for malware analysts. There are a lot of challenges because actually the attackers always. I always say the attackers is always one step forward than defenders because of the
That,
yeah.
that's apparently the case because many we see almost every day some kind of breach. So obviously attackers are one
Yeah,
step ahead.
yeah. So we are still actually relying on something that doesn't work for nowadays. Especially, for example, pyramid of the pain. I think it's outdated in some way because actually, if you have a hash, I can just insert one null bytes, the entire hash is changed, or
That's
I
correct.
can reverse engineering the samples and add new functions, add new APIs. So what you do in this case? Nothing. And maybe for example for network related we are implemented DGA domain generation algorithm or IP flexing, or I change the cobalt strike into data comet into in Gerard. So everything is collapsed. So that's why I faced a lot of some bad words from the researchers. How you say
Yeah,
paradigm of pain is outdated.
I guess the way that things try to the defenders try to go about it is try to figure out what is the actual behavior, not to rely on signatures or these kind of things that are very easy to change, but rely on the behavior. What is it actually doing? Doing that, opening this socket, writing something there, allocating memory here, these kinds of things, and they try to figure out whether there's something malicious there. It's still not easy because you can do things like indirectly, like network operations using the bits service, for example. It's not
Yeah,
directly in the malicious process. Very difficult to know that's actually connected.
yeah.
It's
So,
complicated,
but
obviously.
but how the threat actors, IPTs or cyber criminals find the new load beans? So how they found a new maybe utility, the default utility of Windows to performing a malicious operation, like a bits admin, for example, or shadow copy.
So there is just there because these tools, again, they have their legitimate uses. So Microsoft can't just get rid of them, and so they just go beyond what Microsoft has anticipated because Microsoft didn't think about all the possible options, and there's no way to think about everything that
Yeah.
could be done.
Yeah, as I think it doesn't design it for security. I always mention that internet is not designed for security. It designed for make our
For
daily life
sharing,
easier.
for working. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That's why
Because
Microsoft, are you mentioning, doesn't thinking about maybe this beats admin one days or curl or uh, another IRW in PowerShell or IEX invoke expression execution and so on to malicious purpose.
well, to be fair, it's not possible to think about all options. Microsoft actually, in recent years, is very much thinking a lot about security.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
since there are things that already have been around like many years, they also care very much about compatibility. So they can just make very significant changes without potentially affecting their customers.
yeah.
So it's a tricky balance. On the one hand, you want to be secure. On the other hand, if you be too secure, it's going to be against usability. There's always like this clash between usability and security.
Yeah. So Pavel, for example, student asks me about the courses, even sometimes speakers around the conferences. I always suggest many academies. Trainsec is one of them, and of course your content and your courses are related to Windows internal because Windows internal. Without Windows internal, I think analyzing a malware is quite difficult because actually in the end of the way that threat actors abusing legitimate utilities in the operating systems, for example using cmd slash cping and then deal to remove the malware sample on the disk and so on. So we know Windows internal is a quite wide range, and no one can control everything in a Windows internal unless as if he is or she is just put on him live or her live on Windows internal. So which part of Windows internal simply is important to security researcher and malware analyst?
I think it's very important to get very comfortable with the fundamentals. Things like processes, threads, virtual memory, DLLs, registry, these kinds of things. It's critical to be very comfortable with those concepts. And then, as you say, you can't learn everything about Windows. There's just no way. But then you can read research from other people or read
Google it.
documentation, and it makes sense. You read the Windows internals book, for example, the books, they're pretty hard to read, relatively speaking, but once you have the fundamentals already within you, then they're much easier to read. And you can
Yeah,
always learn something new because things always change. If you have a strong foundation, you can learn anything. If you don't have a strong foundation, it's like trying to build a
yeah,
house starting with the roof. It just can't work.
yeah. Pavel. The one point in my journey on learning is I always love fundamental. For example, if there are courses related to reverse engineering 101 and then 201, I will start with the 101 because actually fundamental is the key. As you mentioned it, if you don't have a good fundamental, finally you don't know what you do.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And I see many people in the security space try to reverse engineer or malware analysis that and they have no idea how the operating system
yeah,
works.
yeah,
So
yeah.
they have no chance, really.
Yeah, actually, even the one of the most issue is in malware analysis. This using the tools that this tool is not necessary to be using in this processes, because actually if you're using wrong tools you will get a wrong result. Yeah, it's good. For
Yes,
example,
indeed.
we have a PE studio and you have a U tools. Maybe first of all, I will start with your tools, and then for validation, because validation is very important. It's easy for validation, but there are some researcher moving to using the many tools that doing same job, doing same job. That's one of the
Yeah.
issue that don't to it's make complexing your analysis processes.
I agree. And in general, if you look at the Windows, for example, all the fundamental pieces like processor, threads, visual memory, all that, it's been the
Handles.
same since the very first version of Windows NT. It's been the same idea.
Yeah,
Things change a little bit, but the foundation is the same. So
yeah.
once you have that, you can go anywhere you want.
Yeah. One of the friend of LinkedIn asked one question for you. He said, "How I know or how we know our analysis process is done, and we have to leave it."
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
One person on LinkedIn asked me a question that asked you. He said, "How I know that my reverse engineering or Windows internal analysis is done on the sample."
Well, I'm not sure what done means, but
Done,
if
I
you're
mean,
trying to reverse
completing
something,
completing the project or analysis report.
if you can prove that what you see is actually what is happening, then you're in a good place. If you can
Yeah.
prove, not just say I think or I feel like it does this or that, you have to prove that. You have to show how the steps that are involved there, you actually see them in
Yeah,
tools.
simulated in some way, simulated.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be confident about that, and that starts with the foundations, and
Yeah.
then with whatever you have found out by reversing that particular kind of malware.
Yeah, so simply when you feel that what you written on your report is same that what's happening, that's mean your analysis is done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. At
that's a
that
great
point,
point. So actually, let's ask another question: that how security researcher or malware reverse engineer find their ways to conducting their investigation, find their own methodology, because maybe you will have a different methodology, me have a different methodology, you and other people have a different. How this new security researcher find their own ways to investigation? Because I have seen a people that asked me or maybe asked you and other people's, so I just open another tool, open IDA, open Gidra, open X debugger, open Win debuggers. Oh, that's messy, complex stuff.
yeah. So it's very important to be orderly and have a plan, not just randomly open tools. Now, I will say that I don't like reverse engineering malware. It's not fun for me. I like to
Yeah,
write code rather than
yeah, yeah,
figure
yeah.
out what other code is doing. That's Uriel's job. But in general, it's in any kind of investigation. Any It doesn't really matter what that investigation is. You always start with some kind of plan, and you start small. In the case of reverse engineering or malware analysis, you put that in some tools to get the basics, to get
Yeah.
some information you can get almost for free without having to work very hard. And then you think this is doing this or that at the end of the day. Let me have an hypothesis. Let me start. Well, I think it's doing that in this way. Let's see if I can prove that or disprove that, and then I
Yes.
get a hint into something else, and kind of try to move on, starting with simple things like static analysis, if that is simple, and moving to something else like debugging, if I can do that. Usually malwares, typically it's not really very well easy to debug because some
Yeah.
malware try to hide themselves or not doing the malicious stuff if they detect a debugger around the system,
Yeah.
so it might be a bit tricky. But
Yeah.
in general, the idea is to try to have some kind of idea about what is happening, and then prove or disprove that and move from that.
Yeah. That's actually a very important even to me, because I always like to have a mindset, different mindset to investigate the malwares. Well, sorry, Pavel. So actually, we know Windows internal is a white, and actually we cannot learn everything as we are mentioned already. Um, if you suggest to us between most advanced or intermediate stuffers for security researcher and malware analysts, they should start with the advanced or just keep fundamental and then move into their own ways own trackers on malware reverse engineering?
I think they always have to start with the foundations to make sure they know that very well, to be able to get the base and the understanding of how Windows really works. For example, if you open a file in Notepad, what is actually happening between the time you use file open until you actually get some data? All that stuff, if you know exactly what is happening, then it means you have probably a good idea of
So
the
how we know?
foundations of
How we know, for example, when you click on the notepad, what's happening behind the scenes?
Right. So we have to first, well, of course, we can read stuff about that in books and all that, but then we can try things out. We can attach a debugger to Notepad and
Yeah.
see. We know that probably create file is going to be called sometimes. Let's put a
Mhm.
breakpoint there. Let's see what happens next. Let's see what DLLs are being loaded.
So simply, you means, for example, first of all, we have to have a vision or background of the Windows APIs, and then and came and attach it to the debuggers.
That's one of the ways
Yeah,
I'm
because actually,
reversing
for
or
example,
testing.
if the malware create a log files and we attach it to debugger, we have to put a breakpoint on the read file because it created the logs.
That's right. That's right. So you're thinking about what you want to see, and based off that, you put breakpoints, the correct functions, and try to see what's going on. Sometimes I write code by writing the various functions, see how they behave, what are they actually doing in my isolated process to better understand how they're working in other applications as well, because the API is the same API.
Yeah.
So if I understand how it works in one way, in one application, I can understand how it works in general.
Yeah, Pavel, it's okay to security researcher or someone who doesn't have a background in programming, or there are some people they don't know, they understand the code, but they don't know how to code. That's the issue. Yeah,
I
the
think, yeah,
the
I think it's something that is also important to know, at least at the very basic level, like knowing C. You have to be able to read C at the very least. And I would recommend also writing some simple programs
yeah.
because it will just enhance your understanding, even if it's not your day job.
Yeah, if I think using AI to generate, for example, a script that uses low level APIs and then attach to debugger, attach it to the IDA or Ghidra to then integrate both together and to see what's happened in the sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can use AI to help out and all that, but AI is a double-edged sword, which means that if you don't use that correctly, you basically don't learn anything. You
Yeah, yeah,
might give the AI some instruction, do something, it does something, it seems to work, but you have no idea what's actually
yeah,
happening, so
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
going to make you very
Yeah, I
good.
mean, for example, we will call ChatGPT to generate simple user input, and then, of course, into the IDA, import into the IDA or attach it to debugger, and doing some CMP or push and pop and so on, and call the maybe the printf and so on. I mean, for this simple stuff, as you mentioned, it can be helpful, but for advanced project, it may be destroy everything.
Yeah, it's also it's again it's something. In order for AI to be really useful, you have to understand what you're doing. You want AI to help you, not to replace you. If it
Yeah.
replaces you, it's probably not going to work out
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
long
yeah,
run.
yeah, yeah.
It's something very
I don't
very
know.
like
I don't know when I use AI to generate some quotas. I feel some kind of a bad because it's not mine stuff. That's
yeah.
why. Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
completely agree.
yeah,
I don't like all these completions and all that. I prefer to write my own code. But even if there are some like good uses of AI, and that's perfectly fine. But it's supposed to help you, and you should understand what it's doing, not just let it blindly do things.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you mentioned it. One of the important point learning C language. So C or C plus plus or assembly, which one is important to us?
I think the first one is C probably because C is really the basis of everything. Most operating systems are written in C, and so C is kind of the like the assembly of programming languages. Of course, if you're doing like deep reverse engineering, you might need to understand assembly a little bit, and you might need to use C++ for certain cases, but it's definitely not necessary. I would say C. If you need to start with something, start with C.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very important. So, when students asks me about the how they start, I always mention Windows internal, computer fundamentals, cryptography fundamentals, and then but first one is Windows internal, the first one, because actually
I
I
can
know.
even say that there's something even before that, something maybe more basic is how computers really work.
Yeah, yeah, oh,
I think
yeah,
it's important to understand how computers work. What is binary? How is that? What is memory? How are these things interacting?
yeah,
Because otherwise, it's kind of disconnected. On top of that, then you can start learning about operating systems,
yeah.
Windows internal, and such.
Yeah, but actually, the new researcher is feel that Windows internal is like a philosophy. It's quite hard to understand, and it's quite hard to get at the concept is in an easy way.
Yes, I agree, but again, this goes back to the idea of foundations.
Yeah,
If the foundation goes back to understanding how a computer works and then understanding what is an operating system in general. I mean, operating systems have very common aspects in any operating system: Windows, Linux, Mac,
yeah,
some embedded operating systems. Once you understand what operating system actually does, then it makes it easier to connect the dots. Say, okay, I know what processes are supposed to be because processes exist in any operating system.
yeah.
They behave slightly differently here and there, but the foundational idea of why processes are needed is universal. So once you understand that, it's just easier to learn Windows internals.
Yeah, even Mr. Pavel, that Windows internal is even important for incident handler, incident response team when they are doing the memory forensic using volatility, for example. So maybe
Definitely.
for example, which processes create which processes. For example, if Explore is created by service.exe, it's maybe quite suspicious. But
Exactly.
if they are no Windows internal knowledge or fundamental how the
Yeah,
script.
they don't know if it's good or bad. Just saying, okay, who
Yeah,
cares? Like,
or missing parent IDs. Where the parent ID? Where is it? They are not appeared, and then maybe they're using okay. That's maybe unlinked by DCOM, directed kernel object manipulation technique. That unlinked process from the PEB process environment block, doing F-link and blink and so on. So if there are no Windows internal, how the incident handler realize something is going wrong here?
exactly, exactly. We just can't do that. And obviously, it's a journey. You can't just learn Windows internals in like a month and you say, "Well, I know everything." There's just no way. I mean, even though I'm considered an expert, I still am learning Windows internals all the time. I don't know everything, not
Yeah,
even close. It's
yeah.
just it's a journey. We continue to learn all the
Yeah, yeah,
time.
yeah. I think you are a legend of the Windows internals. That's no doubt. But in the finally, all we always have some skills maybe the other doesn't have.
Yeah.
That's make a different, and that's make a different.
I
So
mean,
all
yeah, I mean, everyone has their own personality and their own approach to things. This
yeah,
is completely unique. It doesn't matter. It's different with everyone.
yeah. So actually, Mr. Pavel, so instead of your books, I know your books is completely a greatest one for learning Windows internal, but nowadays we are live in the century that we need the fast stuffs. We are just scrolling. So there are any cheat sheets for security researcher that learn about the processes, for example, sms.exe, system.exe, or maybe another processes, and then see their functionalities, not in deep
Well,
dive, but as a
yeah,
cheat
I would
sheet.
say that there are no cheat sheets exactly. And today there's so much information, and it's also it's the problem is actually to get to the good information because you're bombarded with information. There's very short attention span these days, and people want to have everything like quickly, immediately. Like
Yeah,
it's a very problematic, but it
yeah,
doesn't really work. It
yeah,
just doesn't work like that. So some people learn better, for example, from books. Some people learn better from videos.
yeah,
Different people have different ways of
yeah,
learning.
yeah,
So use whatever makes sense for you. For example, if you have my YouTube channel, then there's many free videos there. People can use that, but it's not like something that is orderly that you can just learn like by watching the videos in sequence or anything like that.
yeah,
It's different topics, so you still have to have some basic knowledge there.
yeah.
Um,
So let's be our final question. What's your advice for our audience, for students to learn Windows internals and enhance their skill, find their ways into the cybersecurity journey? As a final word.
So I can say two things. First, focus on the foundations. That's always like my first advice ever. And then, secondly, how do you actually know that you understand what you're reading or viewing? And what you should do is explain that to someone else.
Yeah.
And just explain that to a 10-year-old boy. See if you can explain that clearly enough. If not, and you probably didn't understand that well enough, go back to looking at that again.
Yeah. So
The
thanks,
best
Mr.
way of learning is teaching, actually.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Pavel. We are very happy to have you. Inshallah, we will have a big picture maybe one days in the meeting in a big studio together about the Windows internal and the malwares. Again, thanks for having you and have a nice time.
You as